Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. This episode of the show is being sponsored by the Amazonian Plant Healing Center, the Temple of the Way of Light. It's a place I've worked at for, I think, almost the last decade now. They work with the Shipibo lineage of working with plant medicine, and they run 12-day ceremonies, 12-day workshops working with 6 ceremonies, 4 different doctors, healers, curanderos, 2 to 3 facilitators, a pre-ceremony yoga teacher, bone doctors, massage people, herbalists, and it's a really amazing support staff. And they do a really good job, a really amazing job, really, of creating a space that allows people to come down and experience really life-transforming experiences. People come down for a variety of reasons, whether it's a sense of life's purpose, trying to heal trauma, healing specific physical ailments, and it's really just an amazing experience. And having worked with probably a few thousand people now, I've had the opportunity to really see just profound transformation. So if anyone is interested in working with ayahuasca, if you've never worked with ayahuasca before, it's a really amazing place to come down and to begin that process. And if you have worked with ayahuasca, it's also an amazing place to come and really experience it on a deep and profound level. So the temple has been closed due to the pandemic since March of 2020, but they're scheduled to reopen in June of 2021. So if you'd like more information about the temple and the work they do, check out their website at templeofthewayoflight.org. Also, myself and my colleague Marav Artsy, who I interviewed, I believe, in episode 28, will be running diets. Probably when this one comes out, the first one will already be underway, but we'll be doing it the entire month of March, and then also May and June. We may have another one towards the end of the year, but with scheduling and everything that's going on, we haven't made a specific date for that yet. But that's a really amazing opportunity to come down and to diet, which is the traditional way in which people learned experientially from these plants. We work in the tradition we were trained in, which is working with tobacco and trees, doing relatively shorter diets, but quite intense. These plants tend to be a very strong medicine, but kind of with that intensity, there's often the equal and opposite benefits that come from that. So that's a really amazing opportunity. If you'd like more information on that, you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org and Marav's site at tobaccodiets.com. My guest today is Beth Weinstein, and she's a really interesting lady. She has a lot of experience working with plants. She's done ceremonies, done dietas, and she really found her calling, which was to begin to integrate people's experiences into their calling, and especially into finding work, creating a life, and in this idea of entrepreneurship, working on these things like empowerment, self-responsibility, working with regenerative practices, sustainability, and really bringing a lot of what this work can teach into manifestation and really helping to transform our lives. So it was a really interesting conversation. I learned a lot. We touched on some really good points, and I think you guys will get a lot out of this conversation. So as always, if you're able to help to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me, so that I can continue to bring this work out there, the messages out there, to bring these people who I find really fascinating and give them voice. Patreon is a really good option. Through that site, you can subscribe and donate even just a few dollars a month, and it gives you some really nice added benefits, things like early access to shows, Q&As, bonus material, extended footage. So that's a really big help to me, and that's a really big help to support this show. To all of the people who have done that, thank you very much. There's also the option of donating directly via PayPal. There's a link in the show notes. To all the people who've done that, thank you very much. And if you're able to do that, that's greatly appreciated. If you're not able to do that, simply going on the YouTube page and subscribing to the show is a really big help, turning on the notification bell, liking the videos, and also feel free to leave any comments. That also really helps. And if you have any ideas or things like that, feel free to leave a comment. And then with the audio version, going on Apple Podcasts, subscribing to the show, and if you can leave a starred rating and a short review, that's also a really big help. So I think that's it. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Beth. Yeah, cool. We're rolling.
Hey.
Yeah, well, welcome. So maybe we can start. I mean, you probably got this question a lot, but I would imagine most of the audience isn't familiar with you or your background. Probably some are, because I know you did a big plant medicine conference recently, so maybe people are familiar with you. But maybe just to start, if you can give us a little bit about your background, who you are. You've got a Shipibo Atela in the background, so kind of how you got interested and kind of on this path.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me. So I'm Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach. I help current and aspiring entrepreneurs start and grow their business and do work that they love. I tend to help a lot of people on the medicine path with their, what I call, psychedelic business, psychedelic integration coaches, people who are bringing psychedelic work into their coaching and healing, transformational businesses. So, my path, so I'm a 3-time entrepreneur. This is now my 3rd business. Before that, I was in tech startups, and before that, I was in corporate. And, essentially, my long story short, so when I was very, very young, like probably around the age 7, 8, I used to play a game with my best friend called City, where we owned businesses and we were these like jet-setting women that, made our own money and got to travel all over the world. And that was kind of the game that I played as a kid, envisioning what kind of life I would have. I always knew I was out to work for myself, but I was also raised in a very traditional American family that was like, you just go to college and you get a job and you suck it up and then you die. And that's how I was raised. And when I was pretty young, I knew I was here to be an entrepreneur. Of course, I didn't know what that meant and I didn't know what it would look like, but I could feel it in my heart at a pretty young age. And I was also on a pretty deep spiritual path from a very young age. I assume it's because I'm a Sagittarius with a Leo moon. I have no idea. But, I ended up taking my first psychedelic at the age of 14. So I grew up in California in the Bay Area. I always blamed California, and I was outside of San Francisco and things were very readily available back then. I had also started going to like youth dance clubs at a very young age and, getting into the drugs very early and the rave scene and all that kind of party scene throughout my teens and 20s and college and then beyond that. But here's the thing, I was also an athlete. I was always very active, like to move my body. And when I graduated college and moved to New York City, I made I did the traditional path of like, you go to college, you get a job and you suck it up, because I knew what I wanted to do and it was work for myself. I didn't know what it was. So, but in the meantime, I did the safe thing, which is like just survive, right? Especially in your early 20s, it was like, just make money. I wanted to live in the city, expensive city. So I went through that path and of course, hated every moment of it. Pretty much, it was a great learning experience, but I always knew I was here to work for myself. I always knew that I was going to have my own business. And I kind of just held that as a prayer. But also through all this, I was still in the kind of party lifestyle and dancing and kind of the festival lifestyle. But I was also Very active. I took up running. So I had always been active with sports as a kid. And the one thing when I was in my 20s living in New York City, the lifestyle was all about drinking alcohol, and there's only so much alcohol one can drink. So I was like, I need a healthier outlet that also feels good. So I took up running and got really entrenched in the running community, because the one thing I noticed while running was that it felt very similar to the same feeling I would get while doing ecstasy and dancing at a rave. It was like the same euphoria, the same connection with other people, the same kind of community feeling. And so I started going really deep into this running thing, which was a much healthier choice than just partying all the time. And, through a series of life events, as the universe always does, I started noticing, I started really wondering, what was this feeling I was having? And, I had studied psychology in college, and I was originally on a path to become a therapist. But I started noticing where my mind went when I ran, and why it reminded me so much of the feeling of being on ecstasy dancing when I was younger. And so I really started exploring the mind on a deeper level, and quantum physics and meditation. And, of course, I was still occasionally doing drugs in a recreational way. But I remember there was this point where I took psilocybin on a hike with some friends, and of course we all thought it was recreational, right? But it was the first time, and it must have been in my, I don't know, late 20s or something. It was one of the first times where I really noticed a shift in the medicine, meaning it started showing me different things, or I started feeling the connection to nature in a different way, and really seeing things differently. And I was like, well, wait, what is this all about? And so this whole path of wondering and inquiry and experiencing and just, feeling into it all really took me onto a deeper path. And then, of course, a series of events. It was one thing after another. I was in New York City during 9/11. That was very traumatic. My father died pretty suddenly, right before the economic downturn of 2008 and 2009. So there were all these things. And then a few years later, I got this crazy mystery illness that no doctors could figure out. I went to my first Burning Man. That was a pretty intense, deep spiritual experience. I had taken, to this day, I'm I don't even really know what it was. I took a research chem type psychedelic that a friend of mine, who's actually a chemist with a PhD in chemistry, made. And, it was everything was coming together, my life in all these different directions, and everything started to connect and make sense. And at the same time, I was going through this career change. I had lost my dad, and then I had lost my job, and then I had took time off to really question what life was all about. Because losing your dad very suddenly, only about 8 years after he retired, really made me wonder why are we just working to then retire and die? Because my dad was kind of the very typical American that held the same job for 30 years, and I don't think was ever very satisfied. It was enough, but it wasn't I knew it wasn't his passion. And so, just really deep exploration into what is this whole idea of work and career and life. And of course, my business was still running in the background. I still had this dream. And by then, I had been really entrenched in running. I'd run multiple marathons and gotten into ultra marathons. And I had already been thinking about developing a running clothing brand. So I'd worked in fashion for a while, the worst industry on the face of the planet. I knew fashion was not aligned with who I was and my values about sustainability and the planet. And I knew there had to be a better way. So during this time off, I had this, I finally was what? I really want to give this idea a try. And I had been thinking about developing my own running apparel brand for about 8 years. It had been kind of thinking about it and coming to fruition and wanting to do it, but being afraid. And it was through all these different series of getting sick and getting fired or whatever. It was a layoff of multiple people, losing my dad, taking time off. I finally decided to just go for it. I had moved into tech startup industry, which was much better fit than apparel and corporate. But then I realized I was helping all these early stage startups grow and scale their business. And I was like, why am I helping everyone with their dreams? Right. So, and during all this, I was having all this like deep, intense spiritual growth, going through this weird illness and all these, like initiations of sorts. And of course, I had never really had thought about taking psilocybin or ayahuasca in a ceremonial setting, but of course they landed right in my lap. Through a series of events, someone I know started telling me about the guy who I actually primarily work with today. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I'll go try it. I had been really deep into meditation on the Buddhist path. And I thought ayahuasca would be something I would do once in my life. And I really went in there with the intention, like I'm doing this once and that's it. And so of course I had the most powerful experience I've ever had to this day on that first sit. And it just took me on a path of knowing that this was here for me and I needed this in my life. And then I fell, pretty deep into the medicine work in a ceremonial setting. So not just the recreational anymore, but really shifting more only towards, intentional ceremonial work. And this was about 8 or 9 years ago. And through all this, I had started up a business. I had done the running apparel thing and given it a go and was still consulting. And this is where things started to really shift. People started coming to me constantly asking for help to start their business. And this went on for years. This went on for like 3-4 years. And, through this, I'm also working very deeply with medicine on a deep Buddhist meditation path, doing a lot of my own deep inner work, really going through a lot of very quick exponential changes. I had started a business, had phased out working for others. And I was just helping people. I kept saying yes to everybody because I wanted to help. I wanted everybody to live their dreams. But what I started noticing is people weren't really getting any results from, a 2-hour coffee or a 3-hour call or whatever it was. And I was giving away all my time and energy and love. And then, I'd run into people a year later and they're like, oh, I never did anything. And I remember being really disappointed. Like, why is everyone finding this so hard? Like I had started a business completely on my own with no help, but I had known how to do that throughout my whole career. Like this is actually very natural to me as a business person. I've always been like kind of the natural entrepreneur, and I already knew how to start up and grow a brand because I had done it for other people for so many years. So, I got to this point where I said to myself, and I was getting all the signs from the universe where friends were telling me like, you should just do this for a living. Why don't you just help people with their businesses? And I was like, what is that a thing? But I said to myself, the next person who asks me, I'm going to make them work with me for a few months and I'm going to make them pay me money and see if that gets them results. Because first of all, I was getting really overloaded with people asking me for help. Like, you can't say yes to everyone when you're also trying to run your own business. So the next person who asked me was someone I barely knew. It was like a friend's brother. And I made him this offer, and that's how I got my first client. And so I kind of fell into this business coaching thing through the act of just, like surrendering to all the signs. And then additionally, I was on my first dieta down in Peru. And I remember having this vision on my very last ceremony. And to this day, this vision, it holds almost everything I do in that essence. And the vision was showing me, what would life be like if you just did what you loved and like helped all your friends? Like that was literally all it was showing me. It was helping all my medicine friends, helping my own community, because I saw my own community really struggling with their livings and their businesses and, getting their gifts out to the world. For example, one of my good friends, when I met her, she was this like super gifted herbalist, like a really pure medicine woman. And I asked her one day, I was like, oh, is this all you do? Like, because I knew how much money she was making, and it was literally like $400 a month and living in the US. And I was like, how are you living? So I actually just started helping her. Like, I was like, let me just help you. Let me see what this is like. and if it helps you at all. And that's kind of how my coaching business started. And what I realized was, you know what, I'm called to help people who resonate with me, who understand the path I'm on, and also that I can understand the path they're on, especially when you're on this medicine path. It can be very deep and there's a lot that can come through. And so I ended up just helping medicine people, you know, very naturally. Like a lot of my clients were on this path. And then a few years ago, also multiple, you know, ceremonies and dietas, it kept showing me and it kept telling me to talk about this intersection of being on the medicine path and working really deeply with psychedelics and plant medicines, and how it actually helps shape our purpose and come into our heart and follow our true path. And it kept telling me to speak more publicly about this. Before I was very like, you know, a little private and only to my email list and usually in code words only, you know, like people, some that knew and some that didn't know, you know. And then, you know, I kept ignoring it for 2 years and I was like, no, I can't go public. Like, that's too much. What if I get everybody in trouble? Or what if you know, authorities come knocking at my door? And then it was like eating me alive, like everything else. Like if you don't do it, the universe will just do it for you. And it's interesting. The week I decided, you know what, I'm going to go for this. My friend who's, you might know, his name is East Forest. He's a musician, Trevor. He had just released an album called Music for Mushrooms. And I was like, oh, Trevor's going public now too, the exact same week. And I was like, oh, okay. Now I feel better knowing someone else who's like very public about it. So from that point on, I just, you know, I'd already made multiple summits previously. So I decided to make a new summit around psychedelics, sacred plant medicines, purpose. And that was the first summit. And, you know, I did it. I actually thought no one would have any interest. Like I really thought maybe it'd be like a couple hundred people. I was like, no one's going to find this interesting, but I knew I needed to do it for myself and for my higher self. Like the medicine was just telling me like, go do it. So I approached it with zero attachments. And it ended up that a lot of people were like, yes, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about the other side of not just healing PTSD, anxiety, depression, and trauma, but what about how we can actually do business on a different level on this earth? Like, how do we have conscious business? How do we do business with purpose and heart and purity and also sustainability with the earth and its inhabitants? Because, you know, me as someone who had a sustainable clothing line, which, you know, I eventually closed it down, it's, you know, being in that industry that's so unsustainable for so long, it just really woke me up to like, we need to do business in a totally different way. Like capitalism in itself, obviously everyone knows this, it's broken. And so it's all, you know, it's all tied in together. What I believe is this path of the heart, you know, and there are now really amazing entrepreneurs making millions who are also on this path and trying to do business in a more sustainable manner. And then also, you know, people doing transformational work. Like, how do we help this planet as a whole? Like, what is our deeper mission? And so I started just talking about this intersection of this path and having purpose and what it all means, like from now and into the future, and what it all means for the transformation of the planet. So that's my long ass story. And yeah, so thanks for listening. That's how I got here.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. There's a lot there. I think that the first question maybe that comes up is, I think especially in this work, what I've noticed is I think there's a lot of resistance to things like entrepreneurship or this idea of creating one's path, of really moving forward. And, you know, some of that could be rooted in these ideas of like appropriation and taking things. But it's also very interesting because I would imagine, you know, you said since you were very young, you had this interest in things like entrepreneurship, which for me is really also this idea of like self-empowerment. And one of the things for me that these plant medicines really point towards in people is this idea of self-empowerment, of, so much of even the word psychedelic. I mean, it literally means the mind made manifest, the mind revealed. And so much of what these plants are working on is kind of getting to the root of these blocks, these barriers that we keep in the way of us fully being integral, of being whole, of taking charge of our lives. Even, these ideas that are really talked about now in this community, these ideas of like trauma, these things that are holding us back. And it's this interesting thing where we live in a culture where we seem to be moving towards this direction of almost like idealizing these things, like whether it's identity politics or, I am this, I am my trauma, I am my skin color. And ultimately for me, what the plant medicine is really pointing towards is the letting of those things go, because those things ultimately hold us back. And it is this idea of self-empowerment. So I guess the question is, if that's what this plant medicine is kind of pointing towards, do you also get that sense of there's sometimes some resistance to that? And why do you think that is? Because almost it seems like entrepreneurship has become almost like a dirty word, like it's exploitative or and literally, I mean, one of the definitions of capitalism is the voluntary exchange of goods, and I think we would all agree that that's a beautiful thing. And this idea of self-empowerment, taking our lives into our own hands, creating our own destiny. So have you noticed there's resistance to
Oh,
that? And why do you think
Jason,
that
this is yeah, so this is actually one of the ways, one of the reasons I fell into speaking about this interconnection of being on the medicine path and entrepreneurship is what I started witnessing even within my own community, even on the dietas I've gone on. What I would see is a lot of people would go in there hating their jobs and hating their life and kind of wanting to make these big changes. And they would go have these peak experiences, whether it's, with medicine or other things or a combination, usually a combination. And then they would fall back into their own patterns of like, well, I'm just going to be miserable. And it was kind of like, why are you doing all this work if you're not willing to make the change? So that was one thing that I would see come up. So that was one side of it, which is like, people so stuck in fear that they don't make any changes in their life. And then they're just chasing all the ayahuasca or whatever it is, and not really getting any of the, like, what's the point of doing all this work if you're not actually going to make it manifest in your reality? So that I would see, that's one side. And then I would see the opposite extreme, which is go on dieta, drink lots of ayahuasca. And I know this has happened to me. It happens to me a lot, where then it's like, you know what? I'm just going to get rid of everything I own, quit my job, take my guitar and live on a mountain and totally check out from life and drop off the earth and wait until money isn't a thing and I can live off the land. And I've seen that happen with some of my good friends. And then a year later, they come back and they're like, oh my God, I'm out of money. Shit. So I was like, there's these extremes, and the ones that went and just quit it all and threw it all away. And, which, of course I love the idea of like, yes, definitely clear some crap out of your life that doesn't serve. But at the same time, when I would witness that, I was like, well, you have these gifts, you're born here at this time in human history where, you're needed in some form. Like, to me, every human has something to share. And if we can just shift our mindset around, okay, what does it really take to create a transformed planet? Like, that's my larger mission, is like, how do we contribute to helping one another, helping the earth, helping, be in more harmony on all levels. But I don't know if it helps if you just check out completely and like leave society and leave the systems. To me, and it's interesting, I had a major download about this during one of my last ceremonies, where, because I've always been kind of fighting myself on this too, is like, well, I would love to just leave the system completely, but then you can't really make the change you want to see if you're just checked out of the system. So, to me, it's about playing in the system and infiltrating it with this new way of living, with this new way of doing business, with this new way of being, meaning like, okay, what happens when you start from the heart and then put it out there? What happens when you start to see money as actually an empowering, an empowerment tool that is given. And the reality is, yes, of course, it'd be great if it all just disappeared from the earth, but that's not going to happen today. So instead of fighting against it, we can actually embrace it and use it in new ways, positive ways, ways that are actually empowering, like you just said. And this is where, I've done a lot of the deep work around shifting my own beliefs in money and mindset around money. And of course, like so much ancestral work around money. I mean, it's all interconnected, right? It's like the human experience is tied into all this, taboo around sex and power and money and our, our ability to manifest and our mind and all the inner power that we have that we're not tapped into. All of this it's all interwoven, right? It's like, but if we actually see this differently, like we take an opportunity to shift our perspective and welcome it with love versus like, oh, everyone with money is bad. I know so many people who believe that, but it's interesting. One of my best friends, who's been a really good friend for a long, long time, he's in the billions, like he's a billionaire. But the reality is he's changing the healthcare system. He is someone who believes very strongly about psychedelic medicine. He's given tons of money away to really empowering, startups, nonprofits. Like he's funded a lot of amazing programs. He's a burner. Like I could go on and on. So I'm like, and all of his friends that are also in the millions and billions who I've met, they're also doing really amazing work to change this planet. Like sustainable incubators. One of them literally has a hedge fund, a venture capital that's based around love. I'm like, can you get any better with that? The guy has a private jet, but he knows the truth about love leading. So I'm like, but is money all bad? No, like maybe, yes, of course, there's some people that are not doing what we'd all like to see with their money. But if you actually get the money into the hands of the people on a spiritual path who are awakened, who, see the world in a different way and see the potential, like that's where we can actually all take an opportunity to shift our mindset around business, money, working, and see it as, what would our reality be like if every human on this planet was allowed to live, not just survive, but like thrive off of what they enjoy doing. Meaning like artists are thriving, making money, like when is that day going to come where they're not caught in that like mindset of like you just said, like owning I am a starving artist. But this is where the deep healing work, it all has to come from within. It's not like, oh, just go hate on Jeff Bezos and, what's his name at Microsoft. It's not about just like, oh, hating and separation. It's about, go inward first. Like, where is it that you need to do your own healing around, like the systems? And I mean, it's like, I get it. The systems are totally broken. They always have been way before COVID. And we all know that they're changing. I mean, it's right in front of our eyes. But in order to create systems that actually support humanity and the earth, we need to be part of the system. Like we need to be the ones like speaking about this like we are right now, to be, getting our own message out, because the more people with positive messages, like I interviewed David Bronner, the guy put so much money into pretty good, for the most part, really good organizations, nonprofits. He helped the whole decriminalization movement with like multi-millions. And I'm like, what would happen if all of our CEOs around the world did that? Like imagine how our planet would be better. And I know this is where we're shifting. So this is where I really encourage people. And I know because all my clients come to me with this like deep money issues and blocks around like, who am I to do this? And how do I ask for money and get paid? And how do I start a business while also being like truly authentic with who I am? And I'm like, yeah, there is a way. I mean, I've done it. Most of my friends who are, almost all my friends who are entrepreneurs are doing extremely well. And they're all like just really genuinely good people with good hearts who are like living their authentic truth. And that's it, So there is a way, but I do believe a lot of this is like the deeper, like letting go of like what you just said. It's like holding on to our traumas and living in victimhood and like blaming the external, which as we're seeing is such a huge problem in our society right now. Everybody's like pointing fingers and blaming external and blaming. And I'm like, no, point inward first. Just go inward. Like it's all, work on your own inner, I'm trying to not even use the word healing anymore, but your own like loving what's in you, loving your shadows, loving all the, the work that needs to be looked at, like the traumas, the ancestral shit you carry. By the way, I hope I can swear on this stuff. I believe that's the real work that needs to be done on this planet, is like go inward first, look at yourself, because it's not like the 10, 20, 30 multi-gazillionaires around the world that are ruining the planet. It's like each and every one of us, it adds up. So to me, this is like literally my mission of what I do every day in my business. This is the world I see, is that we all have the potential to live from our hearts, be very well supported, doing work that we love, and actually like start to live in balance with all humans and earth. And I know it's, maybe we won't see in our lifetime, but I know it's the direction we're going in. I do believe the growth in plant medicines and the awareness of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines, I know this is a part of this, of course it has to be. I mean, it's like, it's not just kind of like a weird coincidence that they're so popular all of a sudden when the world is shifting very fast. They're here, I believe, and you probably share some of the same views, but I do believe, these mycelium and the vines are spreading themselves around the world with a message to talk to us and tell us something, because it's time. It's like, why would this be, growing in popularity every day if it wasn't needed? So I love this subject, by the way. If you can't tell, I get very passionate because, it's like, I always want the world to meet my billionaire friend, because I'm like, if you knew that there's a ton of billionaires out there who are like him, you'll have a lot more faith in money and capitalism and business when you meet more and more of these amazing people. And there's more of them every day. Like, that's the good news, is, it's like every day there's more people shifting in this direction. Like, and it's like, we can't stop it. More and more people are waking up, more and more people are having psychedelic experiences. And once you go there, you can't really turn back, So I have faith in the future. We'll see.
Yeah. You mentioned this idea, which I think is really important, kind of this idea of integration, of if we don't integrate these experiences, kind of what do they serve us? And use this idea of kind of, going off into the land and having your guitar and just thinking you're free. But it made me think, because in this work, the majority of this plant work is done by a doctor, a curandero, a healer, whatever word one wants to use. And I often think of my teacher, and he has a clinic where he does a lot of donation work. So anyone can come and see him, and it's give what you want. But if you want to learn from him, you have to pay. There's a cost to that. There's an exchange. And I think any doctor, if you are out in isolation away from the world, you're not a doctor, because you're not helping people. The definition of a doctor is you have to be entrenched in a society and in a community where you're helping people. And that was actually the role of a shaman, of a curandero, is they were a pillar in their community, because they were actually looking after their community. And then you also mentioned this idea of kind of in your own path, this idea of fear of coming out and speaking about these things. And I noticed that in my own path. Most of my time I'm spending in Peru, and when I would go back to the States, there was always this like anxiety when I came to the airport, because it's like, what were you doing for 10 months in Peru? And this was before I was on a working permit. And, one of the things for me that's very important is to be truthful, to honor our word. But it's kind of crazy, because this work is illegal in the US. So it was always this dilemma of whether to be able to share it. And I think so much, even as we were talking about before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about COVID and how, you know, a lot of these networks like CNN and BBC are built on these ideas of fear. And really that's one of the ways that I think we get caught in a lot of these patterns. Um, but kind of this idea of, do you think with this work, you know, you mentioned it with yourself, I've felt that. Do you think for some of these things, there just needs to be a critical mass where when that's reached, then people kind of feel that they can be empowered in that way? We were talking a little bit about politics too. And in that same way, you know, it seems like, especially in the US, I mean, I'm observing it from far, and I notice it with a lot of my American friends living abroad. We look back in the US and it seems like it's insanity because everyone's being canceled. No one can speak their truth. Any opinion that's not falling in line gets censored in a way. And
My God.
it seems like there needs to be this critical mass where then there's not that fear, you know, when we can just speak out and it's accepted. And do you think that's maybe something that's held back this community a little bit, is just because it is illegal, there was so much stigma around it that it was difficult to fully be empowered in that, but that in a way, maybe that's changing now as it does become more acceptable?
Yeah, you know, this is interesting because, of course, I went through this, and a lot of my clients are going through it right now because they come to me, you know, starting a business. So they're very new, and, you know, a lot of them psychedelic business, psychedelic integration. So yeah, it's a very deep process to come out and be okay with whatever happens. And the reality is, it's like, no matter what you do, it doesn't matter if you're going to be a healer or a life coach or a psychedelic, you know, whatever it is, there's always going to be haters, right? Like there's always going to be that person that's like, doesn't like what you do. It's happened to me 3 times with 3 businesses where I've lost quite literally good friends, or people who I thought were good friends. All of a sudden there's something that I do that triggers them, or, you know, they don't want to support, or they think I'm crazy, or whatever it is. Or, you know, coming out about psychedelics, of course, I knew this was going to happen. There were a few people that really disapproved of what I was doing. But you have to just keep, you know, and I do believe in this idea of really being sovereign is going to be talked about more and more and more over the next few years. It's already being talked about so much. My whole dieta 2 years ago was all about sovereign, like sovereign meaning like really knowing my truth and, you know, standing in it. And if my partner doesn't even like what I say, hey, you know, it's like, and those things come up, you know, it's like, you're going to have differences of opinion with your good friends, your family, your partners, with the random strangers on the social medias, which now we're all seeing as like, you know, like you said, a lot of people are afraid. But the reality is, I think, because it's been interesting to watch, I'm one of these people that's like, let me sit back and just laugh at all the chaos, because I don't really like to engage in it, because I feel like a lot of it is very it's unnecessary. And it's also, you know, it goes against my Buddhist values of you know, bringing together and having unity and wholeness, and not, you know, to me, the call out culture, a lot of it is actually way more divisive than it is helpful. And I can tell you, many friends of mine who are in the BIPOC community, people of color, who completely agree. There's some cases where it's just creating more harm than help. So there is a level of like, and I think people are starting to see this, where it's like, well, wait a second, is this really helpful? Like my recent, the recent one I ran into, which I thought was actually quite amusing, was someone who was saying, you guys cannot use the word aho ever again unless you're, yeah, I know. Have you heard this one? Unless you're Sioux, which, by the way, I'm like, I think it's actually supposed to be Lakota. I don't know, whatever. I didn't even get into that. But I actually sent her a link of one of the Council of 13 grandmothers saying how happy she was that more and more people are using the word aho. It's that we need to understand the meaning of it. But is this bad that I'm a white woman who's using the word aho, which actually means unity and harmony and togetherness and wholeness? Like, it's just, that's where things get crazy. And I was like, well, where are you learning this? How many native ceremonies have you sat in? How many elders have you spoken to about this? because, and of course I know her path and it's zero. And I was like, you know what, I'll happily introduce you to some native elders who would rightfully disagree with you that this is a bad thing. So it's, but then of course I know there's thousands of people that would totally disagree with that. It's like, we just have to navigate like what feels right to ourselves. And that's all we have. It's all we ever did have, even way before this whole, the craziness. And then of course, censorship. Same thing with censorship. It's been interesting. I've been censored a few times. I've definitely had some things pulled. I've been shadow banned, which is a thing. But again, like you said, there's going to be this critical mass. Like, for example, speaking about psychedelics, there's a level where they're seeing like, okay, now all the mainstream media is speaking about psychedelics. So can social media really take down one of my posts? Are they going to? Are they going to want to? And again, the more people who are like, I've had clients censored who speak about sacred sexuality. It's like, this is our life force. This is like creates humanity. We wouldn't be alive without sex. Why is this all of a sudden bad to talk about? So the more people that are speaking their truth, the more it's like, you cannot detain human freedom forever. It's just impossible. It's the life force of a human and all beings is freedom. And there's always going to be another way. Like even now, what we're experiencing with social media, it's like more and more people are leaving Facebook every day, and more people are moving to these other apps that are not yet censored, and it's like, there's always going to be a way. I'm really a big fan of in-person connections, of communities, of like having actual like face-to-face conversations like we are now, even though it's not, in person. And I do believe, like you said, it's like it's in our nature. And we have to, and I'm assuming you believe this too, but we also have to factor into that there's something way beyond us that is happening that we have zero control over. There are shifts on the planet and shifts in the energies and transits going on that will move us in this direction, whether we like it or not. And I do believe, what we're seeing out there with, people being afraid to speak their truth and, and then realizing like, okay, I have to, because now it's eating me alive. It's like, this is part of our evolution. Like, I do believe everyone needs to go through this process at some point. It's, unless you don't evolve at all, I guess, but everyone will be faced with that fear of what will people think, or, what friends am I going to lose now, or who's going to get pissed off. But the reality is, it's in your nature to speak what's in you. And there's a way to do it. And this is what I teach to my clients. There's a way to do it, with baby steps. So it's not like, like me, who's like, let me just do a psychedelic summit. And of course, there were definitely handfuls of haters. And I was like, okay, whatever. So you're 5 people versus 5,000 that love, that said this was life-changing. It's like, that's what I teach my clients is pay attention to the people you're actually helping and not the minority of the haters that disagree with you. Because it's always the minority too. Like even the medicine path, it's been interesting. There's always a very small minority that's like, these medicines are, supposed to be free and they're for the earth and stop appropriating and blah, 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 and stop making money. And I'm like, dude, I'm just teaching people how to integrate it into their business. But first of all, if you've never been around ayahuasca being made, you have to see how much human labor is involved. That is not a free process. There are humans that work their butts off to make, this much chi. It takes like, it's nonstop work. I'm like, and how many people are out there finding psilocybin mushrooms growing in their backyard? Very few. It takes someone to grow them. We can go on and on with all the other medicines and like ketamine clinics and MDMA therapy. Like, yes, I always balance my own business with, like I do, many of my programs are paid and then I do a ton of free content. And that to me balances it out. Of course, there's people that will never buy anything I offer. That's fine. Come to all my free stuff. So this is, to me, this is what you always have to keep in mind when you're living in that fear of like, what will people think? Just remember that you're actually doing more help than harm. Meaning like if you're out there talking about medicines or you're even a facilitator giving medicines, of course, there's so much controversy now over like, stop doing the toad medicine, stop working with combo. And it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, is that really the answer for everybody? I don't know. I think it's more, Trisha Eastman, who's a good friend, wrote a rebuttal to this article. And I was like, you know what, this is actually the one that makes more sense, is how do we actually become more in balance with the indigenous peoples that carry this medicine and give back to their community? How do we keep them, align with what we're doing in a more positive direction as psychedelics become legal? So it's more about figuring out this balance point. And I think that's going to be the same thing with speaking truths and speaking about things that are scary or that people don't like. Just know that it's like all of life. There's always a polarity. And the more we can just sit in that center, like in your grounded self, which is why integration is so damn important. Like being centered and like, really tapping into that sovereign, your heart of your truth, and knowing that nothing can affect you. Meaning even the good, like I keep this in check a lot. Like even when I get positive feedback from all my clients, I'm like, okay, this is great, but I'm just here to fulfill a mission. I'm not attaching to the positives and I'm not attaching to the negatives. And I'm just staying centered in like, let me just listen to what's coming through and be that channel. And I do believe the more we can just see ourselves as that, like we are channels for something else to come through us, like that's going to make it much easier to like not get stirred up by all the, the anxiety of someone calling you out on something they don't believe in, which we're going to see it more. It's only going to be more and more. I believe these are all like energies being shaken up. This is like a gigantic collective purge. And we have no idea how long it'll go on for, but probably at least a few years. And we have to really learn to just like get grounded and like not be affected. It's like this a regulation of, if the world didn't speak our truth, we wouldn't have Martin Luther Kings and we wouldn't have Gandhis and we wouldn't even have, I always say it's like even Mother Teresa had haters, like, Oprah has haters, Marianne Williamson, all these like spiritual leaders, like people hate good people constantly. But if we didn't have them speaking, like what, it's like we wouldn't have great books. We wouldn't have, the Buddha. It's like, look at the Buddha criticized, by his own family. We could go on and on. And so all of these are like, you have to come back to like, remember the source. Usually when I get a hater, it's like, it's from a source of someone who's like, I don't know, they're angry at themselves over something, but more often I get the positive feedback saying, wow, I'm so glad you said that. I really needed to hear that. Or wow, it's good to know I'm not alone. So, it's all about having perspective and getting out of your head. People, like, this is a huge thing. Get out of your head, get into your body, get grounded. And that's like, this is going to be the lesson until at least 2026, because Uranus is in Taurus, which is all about the body. And as we know, this is a huge part of the integration work. So it's all, it's these webs that are all interconnected. I'm glad you brought this up. It's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of, obviously one of the most important figures in history was Jesus, and his message is super powerful, and yet he was crucified on the cross. And
Exactly.
I often mention that there's a guy who I like a lot. I've worked with him a bit, and his name is Romualdo. He's from the Arawaku people in the north of Colombia, and I'd love to have him on the podcast one time, although I'm not sure. I'm not sure how long it would be, because it's very funny. Whenever anyone asks him a question of, why am I suffering, or why are these things out of balance, his answer is always the same. And he says, you haven't made a payment. And that's it. That's his answer for everything, is you haven't made a payment. And he doesn't necessarily mean literally like a monetary payment, but the idea that there has to be this exchange. If we constantly take and we don't give back, or as you said, we point the finger, but we don't point the finger at ourselves, things become out of balance. And you mentioned this idea of it does seem to be, especially in this community, there's this, as you said, sometimes this idea that things need to be free. And as he would say, nothing is free. Everything has a cost. There's a payment for everything. And I think sometimes we look at these medicines, again, these doctors, these curanderos, and in the societies we come from, a doctor or curandero, they're in general very wealthy. That's considered a very coveted job, that there needs to be a monetary reciprocity because they're doing tremendous work. And yet it's this very weird thing where we look at a lot of these more traditional or indigenous doctors, and there's this mentality that their work should be for free because it's somehow spiritual.
My God.
And it's a very unhealthy view from my point, and it's also a
Mhm.
very selfish view.
Yeah.
um, and so at the same time, where do you think is that balance? Because again, if you look at a more traditional way, like the shaman, the curandero, they never worked for free. There was always an exchange. That's actually one of the pillars of any kind of healing work. I do martial arts, I do jujitsu, and I was just having a conversation with one of the guys who I study with, and he didn't want to have someone come to the class because this guy was unwilling to pay. And for him, he said very beautifully, like, I don't care if he gives like one soul, that's the Peruvian currency,
Yeah.
even if he brings me a sack of potatoes, but there needs to be some sort of exchange. Otherwise, it is just taking and there's no giving back. So I think one of the interesting things with this work, and you touched on it a little, but where's that balance between, as you said, even in your own path in the beginning, so many people were coming to you and asking you for help. And I think a lot of people, when they start to do this work, that's a natural thing, is people start coming and asking for help. And it can be very overwhelming. I also sometimes look to my teacher, and the more he helps, the more people ask for help. And
Mm,
it's one of the reasons I don't talk to him that much, is because every time I'm around him, he's just constantly getting phone calls of people asking for help, wanting advice, needing things. And I can see how, in a way, like, overwhelming it is. And so, what is that balance of when people come to us, you know, offering help, wanting to help, because that is, even in this world of being a doctor, being a curandero, or, even in a Western sense, the Hippocratic Oath is the ability to help, to help people in need and not to do harm. But at the same time, as you mentioned, this idea that, or as we both mentioned, this idea, there needs to be an exchange, there needs to be, some form of payment. So how does one find that balance of wanting to help? Because I think so many people who do this work, they have a genuine desire where they really want to help, but then at the same time, the work you're doing is how do we begin to monetize that? Because again, if there is no exchange, it's not healthy. And also for the person practicing, like, it's not sustainable. You use that word sustainable. If we're constantly giving and giving and giving, then eventually there's nothing left to give. So how do we make that I mean, I guess you could say career, but even just that word sustainable, how does that become sustainable where we can make a life doing that while still giving back? I know that's a big
yeah.
question, but
No, it's a good one. And it's, of course, everybody's still trying to navigate this. And it's interesting because, again, it's like the shaman that I work with in Peru has a whole like botanical garden where he grows all the medicine in a sustainable way so that it can be, sustainably harvest. And there's, 700 plants, and he has multiple workers, and he makes the medicine. And it's like when you see all this time and energy and then human labor that goes into sustaining this really amazing healing work that's available to anybody, you see that, like, of course this has to cost money. These plants just don't grow. I mean, it takes 7 years to be able to harvest ayahuasca. So to pay, whatever it is, like, yeah, there's always a way. And the reality is, like, he can't do this for free, or else he wouldn't be able to serve more people and help more people. So you have to see it from this outside perspective of, like, if I didn't make money, I would not be able to reach more people. So therefore I wouldn't be able to help more people. If I didn't really ask for money back for my work, I would maybe only be able to help 3 people instead of 300, and it's like, that's where it becomes this energy exchange that needs to be seen from a place of, you know, one needs to give to another back, like the sacred reciprocity. And again, it doesn't have to be money. It could be other things. Like, for example, one of the best things that I thought worked really well, which to me, I'm like, oh, this is kind of how society could work, or maybe actually already does. But I was in a Burning Man camp one year where there were different tiers for people at different income levels. So the people who had tons of money could pay all the money, like they would pay the premium, and they were assigned just, let's say, like 2 jobs. And then there were people that wanted to not pay anything or pay very little. They got to work instead, you know? And of course, they didn't like, so I actually had the money to pay for my full way, but I actually wanted to work because I love helping set up a camp. I actually find it enjoyable. So I was like, yeah, of course I want to go early and hang out with you guys and help, because that's part of the enjoyment. So I got a free ticket and a free whatever, I don't even remember what else, but it's like, okay. And then one person who only came in for 3 days and just wanted to come have the experience and leave, you know, they offset it with their payment, meaning like their extra payment probably covered my free stuff. You know, but no one was disgruntled. You know, no one was like, oh, I have to do work. People were actually very happy because it really evened out. Like, okay, I would actually rather work and pay less and enjoy it because I actually enjoy that. You know, so-and-so would rather fly in for 2 days, have the experience and pay, you know, $10,000. Okay, to each their own. You know, there's no judgment in that. You know, like, and it doesn't really say like they're bad because they have money. And I think we just need to see things as like, there's always a way. So for example, you know, and this is what I teach to my clients and how I run my business. I have different tiers of things. Like one is higher end, one is medium level, one is extremely affordable. And the other, which is launching in a few months, is going to be super affordable. Meaning like, okay, if you can buy coffee or a lunch, you can join my program, affordable. So there's different levels. And then I do tons of free content. So, you know, it's available to everybody. But the reality is, and what I've seen this with healing and coaching and therapy and shamanism, curanderos, medicine work, I could go on and on. If you don't put the money in, if you don't give, you don't actually get the kind of results that you want back. Like it's just, it needs to be an even level of exchange. So this is why I've had a lot of clients as healers where they're like, they come to me and they're like, I'm sure this is US money. And they're like, I'm charging $60 an hour. And I'm like, and then they're like, people keep canceling on me. And then people only go to one session, they never come back, or I don't know why they don't get results. They didn't really like it. And I'm like, yeah, but they're not valuing your work. But if you charge like at least the going rate, like where I live, it's, you know, 150, 200, 250, whatever it is for an hour of whatever, acupuncture or massage or whatever it is. And it's like, you know, if they don't give some skin in the game, like something that makes them feel a little like stretchy, meaning like, okay, if you want to get results, you have to put something on the line and be committed, you know, and that's where it's like, yeah, sack of potatoes or money, come up with something. You know, I rarely do it, but once in a while, once in a blue moon, it's usually for a good friend, I'll do an energy exchange where it's like, okay, I need a photographer, you need business coaching. We'll figure that out, you know, and it's like, usually we pay each other, you know, some amount, but like, there's always a way, you know? So usually that's not enough. Like people still need to have something that feels really scary to them, which usually is money, like handing over money to invest in something that you believe in, that you want. That means you'll actually show up. Like for me and my clients, invest in the coaching means you actually go to the coaching calls, you actually take the coaching, you actually do everything I teach. And that's how you actually get results. But if I gave this away for free, they would probably just like bail on the calls and not really do any of the work, and they wouldn't take it very seriously. So it's, you know, again, it's like, we have to see this from a different perspective of, it's not about like milking people for money. It's about like having that exchange where it actually benefits you to put something on the line, you know, whether that's like actual money or a prized possession, or like you, like me and, the last person who I did an energy exchange with, we had a contract written up. Like, you're giving me these things and I'm giving you these things, and it's a contract and we're committing to it. So it's like we could have actually just paid each other money and paid each other back, but it's still that having that skin in the game where it's like, okay, now I'm giving up X number of hours of my time and he's giving up X number of hours for his time. So I think this really needs to be seen from this place of also being supported, meaning like, the more money that I have, the more I can actually distribute out to support others, which I love doing. I'm like, I've donated more money in the last year than I've probably donated in my entire life, all together, just because I'm like, okay, well, I have the ability, and now a lot of people, like organizations I believe in want it, need it. There's a lot of endeavors I believe in. So, and then of course, you being paid well means that then you can go, study with your curandera or learn a new modality, or go take a different training, or go study somatic therapy, whatever it is. And then you're able to help people on a new level. And it's like, I do believe in this cycle of the energies of like money in, money out, money in, money out. And this is, it's like, if we start to see money from this other perspective, the money is actually, it's love. It's a love energy. Like if you pay, if I pay my gazillionaire, billionaire friend for his healthcare company, which I do, by the way, it's like, okay, I'm paying him, he's making billions, but then he gives away probably like at least definitely six figures, multiple six figures a year to other, organizations, other startups. It's like the money is constantly flowing. He's not hoarding it. Yeah, he has a few homes, but he's not a hoarder. He's constantly supporting, I introduced him to Rick Doblin of Maps, and then like, next thing you know, they were like, wow, thanks so much. He made a huge donation. It's like, this is how we're getting decriminalization happening, So we have to, I think it's all this larger picture of like finding that balance within ourselves of how do we see this exchange? Like we can choose to see it from this like bad place, or we can choose to see it from an abundance mindset, which actually will bring in more abundance into your own life. So what I find is the people who are caught in the whole narrative of like, you shouldn't charge and money is bad and ew, that person's like asking for too much. It's all from this kind of lower vibration mindset of there is not enough on this planet and there's actually an unlimited quantity. It's the same thing with people. It's like, yes, we have to have sustainability in mind, but we also have to remember nature is abundant. Like that's how nature is. It's like the ultimate, a seed drops and a plant grows, So if we start to see everything as like, what if we shift our mindset as like, we're all abundant? And yeah, maybe some are like materially more abundant than others, but the mindset it starts from within. And when you shift to that, you'll see more abundance coming into your life, because it is, our reality is a mirror of our thinking and our way of being and our way of seeing the world. So you can choose the mirror of scarcity and separation and not enough and like everybody's bad, but it's only going to keep you in your suffering, and that's a choice. It's really a choice to live like that, and yes, of course, I'm not dumb. I realize there are some societies that have like more versus less, but I don't, you spending time in Peru, I know this, I've been to, 37 countries and many third world countries. The societies that have less material crap, like aren't buying stuff on Amazon every day, they're actually much happier people, because their abundance mindset is from within. It's not like, oh yes, I'm able to order a bunch of knickknacks on Amazon every day. Because that's not where the happiness is anyways. It's like the more money I make, the less I care about the actual money, because it's all about the feeling and the mindset and the belief that like it's unlimited and it's available to everybody. So I think this is a larger picture. And I know thankfully there's a lot of good teachers out there teaching this idea of that the reality is a mirror for what what you choose to think, believe, and be. Like, it's all starts with you. So, yes, I think we all need to figure out a way to balance out. And I believe a lot of this is, again, like deeper level systematic issues. It's like, and making and again, it has to start within you, though. It's like making your own choice. Like, I've always talked about conscious consumerism. It's like, okay, do you need to buy everything that's just cheap crap out there because it's cheap? Or can you actually like save up money and buy one thing that lasts longer, which is actually more sustainable? Like, or make better decisions that are not based on like, this feeling like filling a void, and instead make decisions based on like, okay, what's most important to you? Like, what do you truly need? And it's again, it's a lot of this like looking back into you, and then of course like the larger scale system. But I think there's more and more awareness, and more people are waking up to this. And like, again, the more people that work with medicines and start to see like, oh, it's like a different perspective has come through. Let me think about that. What does that mean? Like, that's where there's going to be like a lot of the shifts, because you can't ignore these messages, and it's like you can't ignore the mounds of garbage on the planet either. So I hope I didn't go off on too much of a tangent, but these things are all interconnected. It's a lot of this stuff runs very deep too. It's like we can't ignore the fact that these are programming that has been with us. It's in our DNA, unfortunately, and a lot of it's like takes some deep level honest work to look at yourself and your own patterns and your own stories that you tell yourself. And that's where it becomes like really a choice. Like, what life do you want to choose? Do you want to choose to be unhappy all the time, or like have the world work against you? Or do you want to choose a different way of thinking, which then starts to reflect in your own reality? And if people need help, I have a really good teacher who teaches all this, and of course I teach it, but it's like you can just start reading and doing your own education and your own work on this. It's all very simple too. It's like, unfortunately, it just takes like a complete reprogramming of everything we've all been taught, which is thankfully happening on a larger scale, it seems.
Yeah, I had known about Tony Robbins for a long time, and I never really listened to him much, but somehow this book came across to me. It was a book, I think it was called Money. And it was very interesting because he was interviewing all of these really, really successful people like Ray Dalio and Warren Buffett and all of these really successful investors. And something that he found, which I found very interesting, is that they all had this idea that in order to make money, they had to give money. And something he found that they all did was they all gave a lot of their money away. And maybe it was only 10%, but at that level, 10% of their wealth is a tremendous amount of money they were giving away. And it was really interesting because sometimes in the morning I go on YouTube and I watch, whatever comes up in my feed that looks interesting. And there's this one guy in New York, and he's a really interesting guy. I can't remember his channel, but he's a white guy, and he learned Mandarin, and he's also, I think, learned Cantonese and Fujianese, and he lives in Chinatown, and he goes around and he talks to all these people, and the videos are always like, these people are so surprised because there's this white guy.
I think I've seen this guy because I remember being like, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's just so funny, seeing people's reactions. But in this latest video is really beautiful because I think one thing he's done is he's shed a lot of light on these communities, which in Chinatown, I lived in New York for 11 years. I actually lived in Chinatown, but I think most New Yorkers don't really know Chinatown that well, or really know the culture. They not necessarily like eating in the restaurants and really kind of taking that in. And I think one of the beautiful things he's done is he's really shined a light on this community that doesn't necessarily get a lot of exposure.
Mhm.
And in this last video is really beautiful because I think he's doing really well now. You know, who knows? He's got like 1 million subscribers. So I'm sure he's making pretty good money. And he did this really beautiful thing, which because of COVID, these restaurants are really being affected. And for Chinese New Year's, he went around and he gave $5,000 to all of these restaurants as a gift. And it was this beautiful thing where, again, this idea of by him doing well, he's able to also now give back and to share. And it's this, you know, this really beautiful thing. It kind of like you're talking about this mentality of like when we do well for ourselves, it's not inherently a selfish thing. It also empowers us to be able to give back. And yeah,
Oh,
so I
love
just
it.
found that really beautiful. And it was really interesting because I just saw that yesterday.
Oh, I need
Um,
to go look that up. I know
so
I lived in New York. I'm actually outside of New York. I'm an hour and 45 outside of the city now. But I have to say the one thing I went back to the city for the first time just a month and a half ago, and I was like, oh, it's really depressing. Like I feel so bad for the business owners and especially the restaurants because it's a huge part of New York City. So yeah, I need to see this because my heart was really broken going there. I was like, wow, it's so different. And that's where we have to start questioning like is what's for the greater good really, like what is the answer. And again, this comes back to speaking your truth. It's like, I mean, even people I know who are pretty high up there in these powerful healthcare companies have said that maybe shutting down the economy was even worse for people's health than actual COVID, and who am I to say that that's true? We'll never know because that's not what happened. But, there's always this, question of like, what's really good or bad. I constantly am referring to that, Chinese proverb. I don't know if you've heard it, the one who's like the farmer it's like this farmer's son falls off a horse and gets hurt. And, someone comes and said, oh, this is so bad. And he said, who's to say what's good or bad? And then, and then the son has something happen and it was really good. And, and at the end, it's like, it's all about like, I forgot how it ends, like I know how it ends, but don't want to give it all away. But, it's about like these polarities of like, who's to say what is good or bad? Like even, the day Trump got elected, of course, wasn't who I voted for, but I was like, here's the thing. Like, I believe that everything has to surface for a reason. Like we are born at this really crazy, chaotic time right now for a reason. It's not easy. I don't know if it ever was easy, and who knows if it ever will be, like, hopefully in a few hundred years. But, I kept saying, I was like, who's to say what's good or bad? And I still like wonder if maybe this shit needs to surface in order to make the changes. Like, what is it really going to take and this is like the as above, so below, it happens within. It's like, what does it take to make inner change? Like it usually takes people being pushed to the brink of, like for me, it was like being on my deathbed multiple times, and like losing it all a couple times and crying on the floor, contemplating suicide a couple times. It's like usually in order for someone to make like massive change in their life, you have to be kind of on that edge of destruction. It's the same thing with the earth and humanity. It's like, what is it going to take for people to wake up and make systematic changes or change their buying behaviors or their eating behaviors or their, littering? Like quite literally living in New York City, I'm like, I cannot believe the amount of people that would just like litter in the subway. And I'm like, what is that? Where's this coming from? What does this take? But maybe it takes having garbage piling up in front of their doorstep to finally make the change. Like we'll see, and this is where like with anything, it's been a very interesting journey. And same thing with business and money. It's like, who's to say what's good or bad? Like, yes, it's good there's decriminalization, but guess what's funding decriminalization? Lots of money and power, and like people who are speaking their truths. Like even when I interviewed Rick Doblin a few years ago, he he saw this psychedelic renaissance as, you know, Stonewall in the 60s and 70s with the gay rights movement. He's like, this is the same thing, you know, and I think we're actually going to have some kind of form of like psychedelic rights one day too. It's like people to come out to their employers and being like, you know, like not afraid of losing their jobs because they just shared about their recent ceremony, you know, like with people, who knows? We'll see. Hopefully it doesn't have to get to that point.
Well, you mentioned this idea, even with money, of having skin in the game, and certainly, you know, something I've noticed in working with many people now is, so, you know, these plants are so interesting because they do affect people very, very differently. I mean, people can have drastically different experiences, and often, maybe even always, I would say that the most profound experiences happen when someone is ripe for that, when someone is ready for that. And there often has to be, in a way, a very dark place where someone has been in to be ready to see the light, you know, in that metaphorical sense. And that, in a sense, is having skin in the game, you know, that the stakes are very high. It's often, if this doesn't work, I'm going to die, or I'm going to commit suicide. Like I'm at my wit's end. And even, I think, a lot of these kind of spiritual teachers that I think a lot of people find reverence in, people like maybe Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie, they have a very common experience. I mean, they were at death's door, more so mentally than physically. They were at a point where they were suffering so much they didn't want to live anymore, and then something shifted. um
Mm-hmm.
so do you think that's maybe a similar thing in the work you're doing, as you said, like having skin in the game is, because it's similar, I think, to a lot of medicine work. You know, if, for example, if someone pays for someone to come down, I can almost guarantee that that person isn't going to have a truly life transforming
Mm.
experience because they don't have skin in the game. um, and so, in that way, do you think with the work you're doing that sense, like there needs to be, because I also see, like, in the world right now, this idea of like equity, or, you know, everything needs to be the same. Like, as long as things were good, we would all be happy. And that fundamentally doesn't seem to be true. Like, suffering seems like it's an inherent part of life. And if we don't go to those lows, then we never truly appreciate those highs.
Yeah.
And do you think that's a similar thing in business? Is that, in a way, maybe we need to struggle, we need to go to those lows, maybe even just to have the impetus to say, hey, like, something needs to change. Like, I need to get myself out of this situation.
I so last year I did a whole workshop called it was something like initiations, like initiations in your business. Yes. I mean, the reality is this is like this is the nature of reality, right? Like we have polarities. Like we would never experience love without the opposite of love. Like we just wouldn't know any better. And it's the same thing with anything in life. Like usually you have to hit the low to hit the high. You have to go, you know, down to that edge of like near death to finally make the changes so you can earn your life back. It usually seems to be the pattern. You know, the only other option is people who are like, I don't know, alcoholics who are numbing, or people who just are completely tuned out and checked out and don't want to deal with anything and just bypass all of it. But yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to someone last week about Eckhart Tolle and Byron Katie and their experience. And it's like, look what happened. You know, it's like push to the ultimate edge. And then now look, it's like, you know, I know not everybody has a spontaneous, like amazing awakening and becomes a best-selling author, but these are people who were at that like final point. And now look, they're amazing. And yeah, it's really interesting. It's happened to me multiple times. Like the one story that comes up so much where I should one day I should tell the whole story in visual detail, but I was like on my living room floor, like crying on my knees, like at the point of disaster of like, okay, there's nothing left. Like it's either I make a change or it's suicide. Like it got to that point, you know? And it's been like that For a lot of my clients, they come to me and I always say, look, like if you're living a really misaligned life, or you're unfulfilled, or you're on the path that's not really your true path in your heart, then you can pretend to work with it and like, live with it. But there's, especially if you're on this path of medicine work or on a deep spiritual path, your soul will not take it at some point. Like it will literally like do it for you. So for me, I've ended up in the ER multiple times. Like I had these crazy things happen where it took literally being brought, in an ambulance to the emergency room to finally be like, maybe I should make a change, So a lot of my clients will come to me, at this, like I have a client right now it's interesting. I for some reason get a lot of people from the Western healthcare system, nurses, people working in medical offices, actually a bunch of nurses, even a doctor, therapists, like traditional therapists, people going from that system who are also on the medicine path. Imagine what that does to you, where they're like, oh my God, I cannot take it anymore, because they know the insides of the system and they're like, the system is so broken and I don't even believe in it. And I know there's another way. And it's, I've actually helped a lot of people become functional medicine coaches and doctors, psychedelic healers, people doing alternative, which to me is the norm, medicine. So, but what happens is they get to that breaking point, especially after working with medicine, and they're like, I just can't take it anymore. And of course, very often they're on the verge of quitting, or sometimes something even happens at their job, or they actually lose their job. I always say, look, it's a lot easier to recognize it now and start to make the changes before all that happens, because it's much easier than like waiting till you lose your job or waiting. One of my former clients, thankfully, had already worked with me the year before and taken her job from full-time to part-time, which I always recommend, like, don't quit tomorrow, just make the changes, make the transition into your entrepreneurship while you still have a job, like do the slow shift if you, unless you can afford to just quit. But what happened for her was really interesting. She went full-time, part-time, started up her business, started getting some traction, was going to continue. And then COVID hit and some crazy stuff went down at her job where they were forcing her to go in, even though she was an unessential worker and she was in like an office job. And she's like, no, I'm not going. And this is in New York City at the beginning of, the first few months of COVID, when New York City was like pretty crazy. And she's like, no, I refuse. And so they like made an agreement and she lost her job and she got some severance. And guess what? Now her business is completely taken off. So, but it was like, these transitions and these moments of, but she knew it was coming, she's like, I hate working here. Like, it's so misaligned with who I am. I don't even want it. It's like, so it's much better to make those shifts beforehand versus waiting till your job is gone, or, the world changes very fast. All of a sudden now you're irrelevant, or whatever it is, or like the markets crash, or you lose it all. And now you're like scrambling for something. So the initiations are here for a reason. I do believe they're necessary. I don't know if, this is like, this is human nature. It's like, we're always going to have this polarity of like our fear. I always put it over here. It's like this ego part of ourselves, which is the fear. And then the truth, which is love, and it's like, it's always going to be there, because if we didn't know the fear, if we didn't know the doubts, the limiting beliefs, the illusion that's trying to keep us trapped, if we didn't have that awareness, we wouldn't have an awareness of like the higher self, of the path of spirit, the path of like what you are really here for in your soul's incarnation. Those are like total opposite extremes, but you have to have both. I believe that there's, the golden age one day is coming, maybe, I don't know how many more years do they say it is, like 12,000 or something. No, Who knows? I would love to know what it's going to be like, but I think we're always going to have those initiations in life. It's like, and same thing, this is where I love medicine for this reason. I say to my clients all the time, I'm like, look, if you can learn to sit with medicine bringing you to the ultimate, like, I mean, I don't know about you, but most people, I know me, I've had so many experiences where I thought I was going to flip out and die during a ceremony multiple times, like been brought onto my knees, like begging and like, oh, like I can't take it. Like the ultimate, I mean, I thought I was going to kill myself on a dieta once. I was actually scared. I was like, oh my God. But what showed me, I mean, it was like that whole year was like so dark for me, but it was my initiation year. It was such a deep initiation. This one moment, it finally showed me, I was like, oh, this is why I need to go all the way to the point of like I announced, I was like, I'm never drinking ayahuasca again, including on this dieta. Like I was done. But it showed me my mind. Like it showed me what liberation truly was. And I was like, oh, I need to sit in this. I need to like be able to sit in this in order to become a real light worker. Like you have to navigate the darkness. This is, the light won't exist without the dark, like you have to have them both. And this is where I believe this is like humanity's work right now, is to like learn to sit in all this discomfort of like the uncertainty and the changes and the ups and downs. And I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but it's definitely not easy, and I don't think it ever was. I mean, I would love to think that there's this one day where there's this golden age and everything is just perfect and beautiful. But in order to get there, we have to experience all the stuff coming to surface, which is things like presidents getting elected that you don't like, or, things happening that you just don't agree with. I mean, it's all, people need to be riled up and all this stuff. It's like doing a Olympia, like it all needs to come out in order to like call on that light. So I do believe this is one of the big journeys of these days, is learning how to like sit in the calm of the collective storm. And this is where I love medicine work. I think, when the pandemic hit, I said, oh my God, I'm glad I've done so much medicine, because I don't know if I would have been able to handle it. Like it was already anxiety provoking, but I just sat and I used it as an opportunity to go deeper into the surrender path. I was like, oh, this was a great reason, or a great opportunity to just put my surrender to practice. Like, and I just went and sat in it. And I think a lot of people did. And that's where I feel like these are beautiful opportunities, and it's the same thing within your business. Like a lot of my clients have to go through this initiation of being faced with all the ultimate fears. And I'm constantly teaching way beyond just actual business strategy, but like how to trust yourself, how to surrender, how to trust your higher self, how to really tune into your heart and know that, to see the signs of your, like the path, like follow the path and notice the synchronicities, notice all the signs, and know that, okay, these actually mean something. And if you can just keep following one little golden nugget at a time, and just keep like, love, like come from love, like lots of self-compassion, like everything will work out. It always does, even through the challenge, that's why it's like challenge equals opportunity is it's so profound and so real. And it's so hard to remember when things are challenging, but it's the only way out, really, is through. Mm-hmm. So
I think one of the main things I see with people coming to work with plant medicine is this sense of a lack of purpose, of not fitting in, kind of this sense of something isn't right in my life, and I need to find the answer. And often for them that entails a job, a purpose. Like what do I do with my life? And I think with a lot of people, there's also this sense of like overwhelm. Like I don't know where to start. Like it seems so overwhelming. So do you have any tools or anything? I mean, with the work you're doing, like how does one go from that sense of like, I don't know what my purpose is, I know there's something I want to be working on, but I feel like I'm not doing that. Do you have any, like, advice or recommendation of how to get to that point of just a complete overwhelm to actually being able to kind of put one step in front of the other and begin to create that?
Yes, this is actually a lot of my clients come to me exactly like this, where they're feeling the misalignment, like something's off, doesn't feel right, they're not happy, and they know there's something else out there, and they maybe have had some ideas, but there's no clarity and they don't know what to do first. So one thing that I always say, which is, part of our societal problems at large, is that everybody's moving too fast and doing too much and having their attention pulled in 50,000 directions, 10,000 social media platforms, on and on. One of the best things you can do is just have a daily practice of slowing down. I love daily meditation. If it's something like finding your purpose, have a prayer, like you can use a different word if you don't like the word prayer, an intention, whatever it is, but ask for guidance. Like that's one of the best things you can do, is just ask and you will receive. I pray with the earth. I'm constantly talking to my trees outside, like, okay, guide me to what's next, give me the signs, let me know, like, and the more you can quiet down, get into your body, let go of the mind, and really ground your energy and ground into that space of just letting it come through, like really allowing the messages to start coming through. And the more you just, and again, don't expect an answer, when after one meditation session, it's a daily practice. And the more you can just be in the space of receiving and allowing what, your purpose is to come through, you will start to feel it. You'll start to get the messages. You'll start to have the intuitive insights. You'll start to feel something in your heart. Like one of my clients has been working with me for a while now. And she's caught up in Japan, in like a very traditional society of like, you work and there's no meaning, you just make money and like that's it. But she's on this, spiritual path, and was like, I know there's a purpose. And it's taken her this huge process of like, okay, daily meditation, going outside, getting onto the earth, having time alone without distraction of like, whatever people are distracted by these days, the internet and movies and like filling that space with stuff, because all of that is just distracting you. Because of course, when you're feeling bad, all you want to do is feel good. And all these distractions are created to make us feel better, even though they really don't. So the more you can just sit with that feeling in you that's like, okay, I don't know my purpose, but I want to, that's where you ask, you can tune into your spirit guides, your ancestors, your higher self, again, whatever you believe in. I'm not here to say that this is what I do. But you ask for guidance, and then you are receptive. And then if you start to see things differently, meaning like you start to notice, pay attention to the synchronicities or the signs or things people say or the people that you meet, or, like a random interview like this comes through and it wakes up something in you. It's like, pay attention to those, because they're all aligning with you. Thank you. Do I have to stop? Oh, thanks. Can you just, I'm on a video. Thank you. There's always package mix-ups with my neighbors, although he's wearing a security jacket. But, all these signs are here for a reason. They're, to me, not saying this is the truth, but nothing is an accident. It's like they're all here for a reason. And if you just have the clarity in your mind to pay attention, you will start to feel, what would it be like if I did that? And this is the next thing I say, is get curious. Like, for me, I had already been running this other business. I had started a previous business. And then, when I had that big vision during this dieta, where it was like quite literally me, like hopping around through the fields, like helping my friends and just having fun. When I saw that vision, I just sat with curiosity. I was like, oh, what would it be like if I just did that? And so then, I got curious and I constantly just asked like, what would that feel like? And then what I did was just let go of the attachment. Like, don't attach to the money and don't attach to how it's going to work. Don't worry about if it's, if it makes sense or not, like, let's be honest. It's like, I don't know, did Airbnb make sense when the guy, first thought of it? Probably not. But now look, multi-million-dollar company, multi-billion, nothing innovative makes sense. So let go of the human, the ego mind that wants to know things, and get into a space of not knowing, get into a space of curiosity and stepping into the unknown. Because as Dr. Joe Dispenza constantly is saying, like, we can only create in the unknown. Like, we can't create from the known, or else we're already going to create something we already know. So it always takes stepping out of the self. And this is why it's important to be quiet and just get curious. So one of the best shifts I ever made when I started my first two businesses was to change the language around things. And so I said, I'm just going to call this a project. Like, what would happen if you just made it a project without any expectations of money or success or fame or whatever it is you think you might have to know, or if it's going to work, if it's going to fail or succeed? But what if you just did it for fun? Like, just do it because your soul is, it's like eating your soul alive. And if you don't do it, you're never going to know. So what I do, and I tell my clients to do this a lot, like, just shift the language, because when people tie in like business and money and like quitting my job and all these heavy things, then that's where their nervous system is like freaked out, and that's where they procrastinate and they get stuck. So the best thing you can do is just do what you need to do to change your mindset around it. Like, call it a nonprofit, or just do it, create a project, have fun with it. And play. If it's not fun, I say this constantly to my clients. I'm like, look, if your business isn't fun, like at least 90% of the time, or at least 85%, then you might as well go get a job that's not fun. Like, the whole point of this is because we enjoy it, and it's something that's from within us that's calling us to do it. It's like, it's from our soul. So those are the first steps I always say, is like, let go of the attachment, get curious, ask for constant guidance, and quiet yourself down. And then that's where, like, when you get to the point where like, oh, I feel that I want to, I don't know, be a psychedelic integration coach. Okay. That's where you then start making like baby steps. And again, I'm constantly saying to people, don't do extreme things. Like, don't go on a diet and quit your job the next day. At least give it a couple months to like integrate, get the help, get the guidance, or set yourself up financially, like save up a bunch of money. And then by the time you know your purpose, hey, you can quit your job or whatever it is. Or, for most of my clients, they come to me making the transition from like job or part-time job, or even a lot of people leaving businesses that aren't aligned and then adding a new layer or a new business and like making the shift. So, and then it's like the baby steps, one little thing at a time. But really, before all that, it has to come back to this root of like, what is coming through your heart? Like, what would feel good to you, And even when I get clients who come to me saying, I have 3 different business ideas, I'm like, start with the first one that like would get you excited to get out of bed in the morning. Like, that's what it's all about. Like, I haven't had that feeling, because I lived in New York City. I did the corporate life. I used to, probably like you, Jason, at some point, I had that morning thing, the alarm would go off and I dread going to work. I haven't had that. I don't know the last time I had that. 2011, I think, was the last year I had that, 2012. And occasionally I'll have a nightmare about that feeling of like, but now it's like, I get excited to go to work. Like, I am almost too excited where I actually have to force myself not to work usually because, time off, I need time off. But that's where it doesn't become like, and I always say a real like heart-centered business isn't work. It's just my life. It's like who I am, it's just part of me. Like talking to you right now, I'm like, this doesn't feel like work. Talking with my assistant earlier, it's totally not work. It's like, yeah, we have things to do, but it's like, it's all coming from a deeper mission. It's like my soul is just operating, and that's when you're in that alignment, like things get really easy, not to say they're always easy, but everything just flows a lot easier. Like other things start to come together and you're living a life of like, pure joy. I mean, yes, of course, there's always challenges. And yes, I hate paying taxes, but for the most part, it's joy. So that's what you really have to tune into. But one of the biggest issues I've seen when people come to me saying, like, and they're usually a little frazzled over like, I need to find my purpose. I'm like, let go of even that attachment to finding your purpose. It's like, just ask again, whatever you believe in for the guidance, and maybe something else will come through. Like, I don't believe that every human has to have a purpose to save the planet. Maybe your purpose is just to be the greatest mom ever, or maybe your purpose is to paint the most amazing paintings that come from your heart, and like maybe not even sell any of them. Maybe that's okay. There's no right or wrong or good or bad, or like, it's like not everybody needs to be a multimillionaire affecting, multi thousands of people. But I do believe everybody has the right, like it's a birthright, to enjoy doing our work and thrive off of it. I do believe it's available to every human on a deeper level.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's my
it reminded
process.
me in this work, there's often in ceremony this idea between an intention and an expectation, and kind of this idea of a prayer, really, what is my intention? And it reminded me of something where this was a number of years ago, and I was really deep in the work. I had done this kind of long initiatory experience. I was working with a lot of people. And I was sitting in ceremony with a number of Shipibo people who I work with, and I had always had this idea of what does it mean to see, to diagnose. And the way many of them would speak of it, I had this image in my mind of what I thought they were seeing or what they were sensing. And so I went to ceremony one time with this very strong intention of teach me to diagnose, teach me to see. And it was this very strong intention. And the ceremony went by and it ended. And I came out and I thought, I didn't learn. I'm just the same. And a number of days went by, maybe it was even weeks. I can't remember now, but it slowly started coming to me, this idea that actually I knew how to diagnose. It had always been with me. It wasn't maybe the way they were diagnosing, but it was the way I was diagnosing. And it was something that I realized I always had. It was probably something that drew me to this work. It was just seeing someone, like feeling them, their eyes, the looks, the words that they spoke, the cadence, the rhythm, the body, just taking in that whole being. And it was something I was able to see. And then it was this fascinating process of beginning to talk with them and working with them. And they would diagnose someone and I would diagnose. And in general, we were experiencing the same thing. It was just each person has their own way of doing it. And, but kind of this idea of expectation, when we think, that beautiful quote you said from Joe Dispenza, if we're operating from the mind that already thinks it knows, that already thinks it has an expectation, nothing can truly change. Like change only comes when we go into the unknown. And in that space of the unknown, we're actually able to flower and to unfold in that way. We are over 2 hours. um, yeah, I had a sense it would fly by. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? I mean, one other thing that I think would be really interesting is the conference that you put together, because I think a lot of people watching this would be really interested in that. So
Yeah.
is that something maybe you could talk about?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I have done two of these online conferences slash summits. One was called Psychedelic Sacred Medicines and Purpose, and the one from 2020 was called Psychedelic Sacred Medicines, Purpose and Business. And I got the honor of interviewing Rick Doblin twice and Paul Stamets this year. That was amazing. I cried during the interview. Ugh, the guy is just up to so much good. David Bronner, some really good people, and then, just some leaders in this psychedelic space, and then some other leaders and entrepreneurs and coaches and healers and visionary artists who are amazing, Amanda Sage and Allison Gray. And it was really to talk about this intersection of the medicine path and purpose and conscious entrepreneurship. Like, how do we integrate this visionary medicine work into our lives when it comes to our work or our business or, what we're here to do? And I always say, look, like, the majority of humans on this planet need to work, right? It's the way things are, at least here in the Western world. And it is a huge part of our life. It's like, no matter what, whether it's business or working for someone else, what do they say? It's like a third or something, or at least a quarter of your life is spent like doing work. So it's, to me, a very important topic to talk about. Like, what is it that you're doing? Like, do you like what you're doing? If this is making you happy or not, and if it's not, how are you going to make the changes? And so most of the interviews are about this kind of, like one-on-one personal level of like, okay, you and your purpose and your own work, but then also, how does this then create a domino effect in our society and on the earth to step into a place of, more conscious business or transformational business, where it is aligned with who you are and your mission and your, what you want to see in the world. And of course, being on this medicine psychedelic path, it wakes you up to see things differently, meaning like, okay, you start to see how certain ways of being are not serving the planet or the earth, on a larger scale. And so we talk about, a lot of these are like, okay, yes, you in your own life, but like, how is this going to affect the future of how we do business, and how we can figure out how to do business in harmony with each other and the earth on a larger scale? Because it's as above, so below. It's like, yes, each and every person needs to do their own work a certain way. And then it's like, how are we going to see this scale out on, all levels, meaning like in capitalism and in other businesses, even, like, we're seeing things change. Like, even when you go to the grocery store now, it's like, okay, things are shifting and we've seen them shift. And it's like, well, what's the future going to bring? And how do the growth in psychedelics play a part in all this? Which was where I was really interested. I'm like, I wonder how this is going to affect things, because there's no way it can't. If psychedelics are becoming more and more legal and decriminalized, and then there's now going to be more and more psychedelic therapy, and then of course we all know the illegal work is already going on, and it's growing exponentially, and it's pretty much all over the world now. I mean, I don't know many places where it's not so far. And so I was curious to talk to these leaders about what they saw as, how is this going to affect, on a larger scale, like business and transformation and, humans waking up to actually make changes. And now we're seeing, so many leaders out there are putting their energy and their resources towards, causes that they believe in, or systematic changes, or at least having discussions on, okay, what is it that we envision for the planet? So that's what these conferences are all about. So it's both for the person who maybe wants to become an entrepreneur or already is an entrepreneur, and it's also for people who want to look at this on a larger scale of, what is this growth in, the medicine mean for all of us? Not just the healing of traumas and PTSDs and all that. Yes, that's also discussed, but, I was curious about like the everyday person. How does this affect the way we spend money, the way we buy, the way we do business, the way we treat our employees, the way we structure businesses, the way we maybe shift to more sustainable businesses like regenerative systems. Like I could go on and on. Permaculture. I mean, it's just, and it's so beautiful. And this, you know, the one thing I have to say is interviewing all these people always gave me more and more hope. I'm like, okay, there's a lot of hope for a future. We also, you know, in the 2020 summit, we talk about a lot of like, okay, the post-COVID world, like now that a lot of people have either lost their job or seen their job change or even their lifestyle change. Now they're all working from home. It's like, what's bound to happen? You know, maybe now that there is no job security anymore in any job. I mean, I don't know, maybe doctors, they're the only ones, even teachers don't have job security anymore. It's like, you know, now that illusion, which was already always there, the illusion of security was never, you know, it was always an illusion. So now that it's become a lot more apparent to a lot of people, I think it's waking up a lot of people saying like, oh, I guess I do only live once and nothing is secure. So how do I really want to live my life? You know, and that's kind of the core of all of it is like, you know, it's like, how do you want to live in this incarnation that you have right now? It's like, and COVID has shown us that it's limited, you know, it always was, but now it's just so much more in our face that you can't ignore what's happening. So, yeah, they're free. Right now, like the way it works is that there's a handful of videos that are free and then the rest are paid, but I'm also starting to release some of these, you know, on my YouTube. I'm also launching a podcast later this spring, which will also be all around this intersection of, you know, the medicine path and entrepreneurship and also a spiritual path. And, you know, I'm curious to interview more and more of these leaders and you, Jason, of course, and to talk about, you know, what do we see as like, you know, the reason for all this? I've always been curious. I'm like, you know, I mean, I have my own beliefs, but it's like, well, you can't really ignore the fact that these people are turning to plant medicines and psychedelics more and more and more. Like, I wonder why. So, you know, I'm curious to see how this all unfolds over, you know, in our future. It's exciting times to be alive. I can say that. I mean, even with all the challenges, I'm like so grateful. It's just such a blessing to be alive at such a potent time in history where we're like actually not only witnessing change, but we're part of it and we're able to co-create it. You know, it's like we can all contribute to the world that we want to see for, you know, the future generations and, you know, for ourselves. So, you know, what a better time to be alive. It's so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
To say the least.
Yes, security is an illusion. That's a wonderful topic. Maybe for part two, I think we could get a lot into that. That's especially in the world we're living in right now. That's a really important topic.
Totally.
Well, this has been great, Beth. Is there anything else you'd like to address? Anything we didn't touch on?
No, people can find me. I'm, you know, all over the internet. It's my website is Beth A. Weinstein. The summits are Psychedelics and Purpose, Psychedelics, Purpose and Business, psychedelicsandbusiness.com. I'm on Instagram under Beth A. Weinstein. I'm on Facebook. I'm Googleable. I'm out there. I'm friends with Jason. So yeah, and I you know, I have a private Facebook group that's about psychedelics and purpose and business. There's a lot of really amazing people in there. It's a great community. Definitely a lot of people getting into, you know, psychedelic therapy and psychedelic integration and hosting groups and, you know, or microdosing. I mean, I could go on and on. Musicians, artists, it's pretty incredible. So yeah, you know, if you're interested, you can just reach out. And, you know, I'm also pretty an open book and very down to earth. And like, I love getting to know my, you know, like whoever's following me and whoever's watching. So if you have something to say, please, like, just let me know. I'm open.
Yeah, wonderful. We'll put all those links in the show notes. And if people are interested in learning more about you or working with you, they can do that via your website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I have a free psychedelic sacred medicines, purpose and business training that's all about how to integrate these into your own calling or your own business. So I can give you that as well. And that's just kind of a fun free training I did. And because I am getting a lot of my clients are like this, but a lot of people are like, okay, how can I bring it into my coaching or my healing? Or like, I want to be an integration coach, but blah, blah, blah. I don't know how to start. This is essentially a training that's, the practical business know-how, but then also a lot of this, the energetics of how do you go do it? How do you start and get past your own limiting beliefs and your fears to start sharing your medicine, because you have the medicine and this is what it's all about. It's time, if not now, when? So I'll give you that too.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Beth. This was super fascinating and enlightening, and I think people are going to get a lot out of it. I think we addressed some really important topics, and I really appreciate your time. And I think it's amazing what you're doing, and that summit you're doing. I think those those three people you mentioned, Rick Doblin, Paul Stamets, Bronner. I mean, they are. I think they're embodiments of what you're talking about, which is really doing amazing work, sharing, enlightening people, doing really good work and spreading that out into the world. So I really congratulate you on that. And I think it's amazing what you're doing. And I think we can probably do a part 2 sometime. And
No, definitely. We'll definitely do a follow-up, and I'll have to have you on mine as soon as I get it. It's coming together.
Yeah. Well, great, Beth. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jason. It was great to be here.
All right, everybody, that's it. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Thank you to Beth for coming on. I think we covered a lot of really interesting topics, and I hope you all enjoyed that. As always, if you're able to help to support this podcast, that's a really big help. Patreon is a really good option. By subscribing and donating, you get different things back. So it's a really nice way of giving and also receiving something. Things like early access to all the shows, chances to ask questions and have them answered, bonus material, extended footage, things like that. So that's a really big help to all of the Patreon subscribers. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. There's also the ability to donate directly via PayPal. There's a link in the show notes of that as well. And then if you're not able to do that, simply going on the YouTube page, the Universe Within podcast homepage, subscribing to the show, turning on the notification bell, liking the videos. That's a really big help with the algorithms and getting the show out to a bigger audience. And then with the audio version, going on Apple Podcasts, subscribing to the show, and leaving a starred rating and a review. That's a really big help. To all the people who have done that, thank you very much. To all the people who've left encouraging feedback, I really appreciate that. And I hope you all enjoy these shows. The next guests coming up, again, I'm still not sure the order. I'm going into a dieta soon, so we'll see who we can squeeze in there. But as always, there should be some really good guests coming up. So thank you all for the support. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next episode.
Doom.